The 2025 Index of ENACT, an organization aiming to enhance Africa's response to national crime, reveals surging organized crime and weakening defenses across Africa. Almost all the countries on the continent, which is 92.5%, are characterized by low resilience to organized crime, with 23 countries affected by a particularly devastating combination of high criminality and low resilience. Well, to tell us more about that, we have Willem Els from the Institute of Security Studies in the studio. Hi, Willem. So nice to see you again.
Hi, Linda.
Well, I'm particularly interested in what you found and also how South Africa compares to the rest of Africa.
Yeah, that's a very good question. You know, if you look at the index every 2 years, we bring out the intake index. It's the ENACT Organized Crime Index, of which the Institute for Security Study is actually a partner. And so what we're looking at there is your criminality and your resilience in Africa, and where we look at 54 of the countries. And so if you look at South Africa, we divided it into the different regions. So in the SADC region, unfortunately, South Africa, in terms of criminality, we are number one. So and that is where you do not want to be. If you look at countries like Namibia and Botswana and even Botswana, even Zimbabwe, you know, they are way down when it comes to criminality levels if you compare it to South Africa. Now, in terms of Africa, in the 2023 index, South Africa was situated at number 3 in Africa and number 7 in the world. We see with this index of 2025 that South Africa moved up one place, where Nigeria and the DRC, they were way ahead of South Africa. In terms of criminality, it seems that South Africa managed to surpass or to bypass Nigeria. They are lying at number 3 at the moment, where the DRC is at number 1, and the short neck behind them is South Africa on number 2.
So, South Africa, the criminality is going up. So, what does our resilience against this look like?
Well, that is a very interesting question, because as you mentioned in the introduction, normally or traditionally, when you've got a very high criminality index, your resilience levels are very low. Now, South Africa is an outlier there. It's one of the very few countries in the world where we've got also a relatively high resilience factor. That is number 3 in Africa as well. And that is where you want to be, because resilient, you want the factor to be high, and with criminality, you want it to be as low as possible. So, so the reason for that, I think South Africa has got fairly good legislation in place. Our policies are in place. Our challenge is that we don't always enforce them or implement these policies, and that is a drawback. But also our international cooperation, and also what is very strong in South Africa is our civil society that is very active and keeping the government to account. So it also look at good governance and policies and so on. So I think with what actually strengthened South Africa this time around, it was a blessing in disguise for us to be on the grey list for FATF, and that forced us to look at our policies, to look at our instruments, to look at our governments, and look at also in the prosecution and how we manage crime, money laundering, as well as terror funding. And those factors actually contributed largely to South Africa having a large or a bigger resilience factor.
One of the index's most concerning findings about South Africa is the above average influence of state embedded actors. Does the evidence emerging from the Madlonga Commission explain why our scores are so high in this area?
Yeah. If you look at the index, as I mentioned, we've got the 15 indicators of what exactly has been mentioned now, especially the drugs and the big five and everything that's coming out there. We see that in terms of our our criminality factor is very high in South Africa. But also you look at the criminal actors, and that is very important. If you look at the average of, for instance, your state-embedded actors. That is your politicians and your officials from a political as well as an operational level that are being compromised. And the problem is we see that all over the world that it plays a major role because those are the people that are actually providing protection for these criminal syndicates in order to operate and to thrive. But also what we see is that South Africa is way above the average for Africa when it comes to the criminality and the contribution of your state-embedded actors. And that is basically what has been playing out in the Madlanga Commission as well as at the ad hoc committee. And all those revelations are actually vindicating and confirming the findings of what has been documented in this index.
So you talked about the state actors and how active they are in South Africa in enabling crime. So where does the private sector and civil society, fit into this whole picture?
Yeah, at the end of the day, it takes two to tango. If you want to perpetrate or to go into organized crime, you look at the definition. It's three or more that have to conspire, and so on. But if you look at like I said, your criminal gangs, or as well as your mafia style groups that are developing, they cannot thrive without the protection of your political or your state actors. So that is your challenge. And of course, corruption plays a major role in enabling that. But also we see that, the private sector, they have to contribute, and they're also a big part of what we are looking at now. So you look at, but in the index, if you look at the actors, we look at your foreign actors as well as your local actors. And we see that the foreign actors as well as the local actors play a major role when it comes to the criminality.
As you said, Nigeria and the DRC normally sort of fight for the top place, but South Africa is starting to look worse than Nigeria, according to your index.
Yeah, if you look at the index, and as I mentioned, it works is scoring you easy from 1 to 10. We see that South Africa had the most rapid rise, and the spike in South African criminality was more than both in the DRC as well as in Nigeria. That means that they might be doing something right, or South Africa is doing something very wrong.
Well, South Africa managed to get off the FATF grey list. So, is there any improvement that you can see in South Africa with regard to criminality and actually South Africa getting a handle on it?
Yeah, I think, the grey list, like I said, is a blessing in disguise for South Africa, because on the one hand, it actually expose you and expose all the challenges that we have, but also it alerted us to where the gaps are and where we have to fill the gaps and stop those in. So when we see look at especially your legislation, our counter-terrorism legislation, our POCA Act, we're looking at the FIC Act, that is your Finance Intelligence Center that has been strengthened, and all those instruments that have been strengthened in order to facilitate a better governance of your financial fields, and also to prevent money laundering to a great extent. We see that those are in place now. They got better budgets, and what we see now is that better compliance from your different role players, from a bank to all the other institutions that need to report. So your reporting is better, because at the end of the day, remember, South Africa has been removed, but they are continuously being reviewed as all other countries are. So we have to have a maintenance plan in place to ensure that we don't slip back onto the grey list. And I think we are en route for that, but it will need a proper political will and engagement in the road ahead. Otherwise, we run the risk that we might fall back onto the grey list.
So how do African countries react when you come out with a list like this?
In the beginning, this it's defensive. So we still saw South Africa, for instance. You compare them and Namibia, where we also assisted to some extent. We see that South Africa, to some extent, I think they were arrogant, because you can submit a self-assessment. You can do a self-assessment and then submit it to FATF, and then they take it for there, and then they will do a mutual assistance with South Africa. So they're not very prescriptive. They're very engaging, accommodating, but you have to play open cards with them. South Africa opted not to submit a initial self-evaluation, and we started on the back foot. Where we look at Namibia, they have got one item to address according to our information. Then they will be lifted from the grey list, and opted to do a self-evaluation where they looked at the weaknesses and they built on that. And then also, the FATF was much more positive towards them, and it led to a more speedy recovery of the economy, etc.
So, is there any sign that South Africa can stop this trajectory?
Yeah, I think the positive side is that we've been lifted. That means that we actually ticked all the boxes that we needed to tick. But as I mentioned, we have to have that maintenance plan, and we have to commit to that maintenance plan. And that is a continuous effort. You cannot say we have arrived. So it's a job in progress, and it will have to be built on. So, for instance, in your maintenance plan, you have to look at some of the gaps. You have to continuously address your gaps. For instance, in the prosecution, and the successful prosecution of not only terror funding cases but also your anti-money laundering cases. And that is where South Africa is lacking at the moment. They got good intent. We've got more than 20 terror funding cases that are under investigation. There are one in court already. There's been 2 that's been finalized where people have been found guilty. But if we look at corruption, we see that a lot of challenges in order. If we look at, for instance, the Gupta saga that's been running for so long, things like that is actually hampering our progress. Should we address that effectively in the near future, it will secure us of not slipping back.
Well, if you look at something like the Zondo Commission and its recommendations and how slow it took, or how long it took for any implementation, or for the Zondo Commission, and for people to be arrested, people to be prosecuted. Do you have any hope that that might improve, and that the same won't happen to the Madlanga Commission, that we go through this process and everything is exposed and literally nothing happens?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, because if you look at South Africa and our history with commissions, all those commissions have got a lot of very good recommendations, but we're actually very slow to implement or to act on those recommendations, and I think that was also reflected in our challenges with being grey listed, is that inaction or non-compliance with many of these things. So should South Africa have implemented many of those recommendations, we might not have been on the grey list. So that is a challenge, and that's also one of your biggest sort of critiques of the commission, the Madlanga Commission at the moment, is the lack of implementation with your previous commissions. So I think there's a lot of pressure, not only from the public but also from civil society and other organizations, for South Africa to implement these recommendations should they come. Now, the interim implementations of the Madlanga Commission should be after 3 months, so that is imminent. It will come in the next few weeks, and it depends then how South Africa will react. And remember, the eyes of the world will be on us, and FATF will be looking and see how we implement these things, as many of those things are being addressed in the FATF report as well.
So this index specifically looks at Africa. How does South Africa compare on an international index of criminality?
Yeah, Linda, at the ENACT program, we also have an international or a global index on organized crime, where we look at 192 countries, similar factors, similar indicators that we are looking at, both in resilience as well as in criminality. And unfortunately, there, South Africa's position has not changed since the 2023 index, where we still rank number 7 in the world in terms of criminality.
Willem Els, thank you so much.
You're welcome.